Cracks in NATO. France opposes U.S. global hegemony policies. And I did put up a video yesterday concerning a U.S. colonel saying that it's a matter of time before NATO breaks up, maybe 12 months or 15 months. Europe is unlikely to support the U.S. agenda to continue to be the world policeman. On July 19, 2023, the U.S. Senate accepted the Kane-Rubio Amendment, which prohibits the POTUS from unilaterally withdrawing from NATO unless approved by two-thirds majority in both the House and Senate. This amendment, if nothing else, is being voted for fear of a new recovery of Donald Trump in the presidential office. It's recalled that Trump had informed the allies that, quote, "I will not protect you from Russia," end quote, while adding that the U.S. would withdraw from NATO if its members did not spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. Although his proposal was accepted even in 2023, several NATO members have not met the goal. While the legislation passes the Senate, the main hurdle will be the Republican-controlled House. The problems? French President Emmanuel Macron has been particularly vocal and critical of the U.S. role in NATO affairs. During an interview in July 2018, ahead of the NATO summit in London, Macron said the bloc was suffering brain death, quote-unquote. The comments were heard as a golden melody by Russia. Its outbreak was a result of Donald Trump's decision to unilaterally withdraw from Syria. Macron went on to add, European countries can no longer rely on America to defend NATO strategically and politically. We need to recognize that we have a problem, he said. We should reassess the reality of what NATO is in light of the United States commitment. There is no coordination of strategic decision-making between the U.S. and its NATO allies. In other words, who's making the decisions if it's not the NATO allies? The concerns of Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky spoke about the fragility of NATO alliance, stating that Ukraine is suffering from Russian aggression because of political decisions made by NATO. For example, the opposition to Ukraine joining the alliance by then German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Nicolas Sarkozy in 2008. Both leaders were instrumental in blocking Ukraine's entry into the military alliance conference held in Bucharest, Romania. Zelensky accused both former leaders of allegedly blocking Ukraine's entry into NATO military alliance during a summit in Bucharest. And this recent Vilnius summit? The recent summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, was notable for what it failed rather than what it achieved. At the end of the summit, a statement of thousands of words was issued by NATO, but he failed to address the most important burning issue, that of embracing Ukraine in the NATO fold. A vague statement saying Ukraine's NATO membership would be considered when conditions are met, whatever that means. The conditions, quote-unquote, were not specified. Fragile coalition. Fragility and uncertainty among NATO states were evident due to, although all NATO members have agreed to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, as requested and directed by POTUS Donald Trump in 2018. The current spending of the European allies is about $375 billion US. From 2023, 20 partners out of 32 do not meet the above criteria. The communiqué clearly states that allies must spend more than 2% of their GDP to meet the modernization program necessary to counter emerging threats. The next summit, expected in Washington in 2024, will discuss the issue of 2% measurements. Sharing the burdens of NATO costs will be high on the agenda. Several alliance partners have been adamant that the details of the burden sharing model should be shared with all members. There is no fixed timetable for consideration of Ukraine's application for NATO membership. Impact of the Russian attack. The war against Ukraine continues unabated. Russia has called it a war against NATO. In its latest statement issued a few days ago, Moscow stated that all sea transport bound for Ukrainian ports will be considered as possible carriers of military cargo and therefore reserves the right to attack these ships. It's recalled that Moscow has withdrawn from the agreement with it on grains. the consequences of this decision result in a blockade of shipping in the Black Sea, which will affect grain availability and price escalation. Views of NATO's alliance members on Taiwan. NATO headquarters in Brussels, in June 2023, issued a document dealing with the alliance's new strategic vision. NATO says China is questioning the interests, security, and values of the alliance. In fact, they called it an economic and military power that remains opaque about its strategy, intentions, and military development. The above statement reflects the paradigm shift of NATO's view of threat perception. NATO sees China as a bigger threat than Russia. This issue has caused rifts between the alliance countries. While most choose to remain silent, French President Macron was not. On the sensitive issue of Taiwan, Macron said, "The question we have to answer as Europeans is this: is it our interest to precipitate a crisis in Taiwan? No. The worst would be to think that we Europeans should become followers of the US agenda." Although Washington has no diplomatic contact with Taiwan and supports the One China policy, it supports the island as a separate entity outside of China's domain. In the past 12 months, the situation has worsened, especially after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August last year, and the possibility of a military conflict cannot be ruled out. The US has upped the ante by permanently deploying a US Navy nuclear submarine near South Korea under the guise of protecting South Korea from a possible nuclear threat from North Korea. The USS Kentucky, an Ohio-class submarine capable of carrying up to 32 nuclear-tipped SSMs, arrived in the port of Busan, South Korea, on July 18, 2023. By the way, the last visit of an American nuclear submarine to South Korea was in 1980. The French view. France is unequivocal in stating that Taiwan is China's internal matter. He does not want to take a position on US-China relations on the Taiwan issue. President Macron supports the doctrine of strategic autonomy outside of US influence. The AUKUS Treaty and the cancellation of submarine agreement between France and Australia are important aspects of the divergence of views between US and France. Just recently, the President Macron visited China. His prophetic words after the completion of his visit to China should not be lost in the eyes of the world, and in particular NATO. He said, "The Europeans cannot solve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we reliably say on the Taiwan issue, watch out, if you do something wrong, we'll be there?" Conclusion: Europe is unlikely to support the US agenda to become the global policeman. European nations should take care of their own security. Any escalation of hostilities with China and Russia will always affect Europe, and he's right about that. Are European countries prepared to suffer because of US hostility towards China and Russia, regardless of the reasons? Disagreement between major European nations with US hegemony in decision-making on NATO policies has made the NATO alliance fragile, and even though membership has grown from 12 to 31 nations, with Sweden joining lately as the 32nd nation and joining soon. This is from Banking News Greece. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.